This is beginning of podcast number 1 for chapter 10. The first part is about planning units. It's important to remember that planning units is very much like the reflective cycle of teaching. You plan units, plan the curriculum, you teach the curriculum in your school and the units or the grouping of units, you assess those units, you assess the program, you reflect on the program, see what you need to change, and then plan for the next year. It's also important to point out here that we do not have a national curriculum in physical education. Many other countries do, such as Great Britain. But we don't have one here in physical education. We only have national content standards. The disadvantage of not having a national curriculum in physical education is that there is no accountability. We aren't considered a core subject area, so we have no accountability, and that sometimes is problematic. The advantage to having a no national curriculum is that it allows teacher freedom, creativity, and choice in what they want to include in the curriculum, according to what's best for their students, what's best for their community, and so on. Another very important part about talking about curriculum is that the states control education, not the federal government, which is why we don't have a national curriculum in any subject area. We can't possibly do it because states are the ones that control education and fund education. The federal government does not. Although the federal government does give us money, they don't have the control. The curriculum flow is a very important concept for beginning teachers to understand. We have national content standards that guide the development of curriculum. They, they, they guide the development of curriculum at the state, district, school levels. But our NASB K through 12 national content standards are what the experts in our profession think is what students need to know and be able to do in physical education K through 12. That filters down to the state curriculum. For us, that's the South Carolina Physical Education Standards, of which there are 6. Those standards filter down and influence the district curriculum guides at the school system level. Those filter down and influence what's done at each school in the physical education department annual plan. That influences what units are chosen to be part of the annual curriculum plan for the department and for the school. The unit plan influences what the individual lesson plans are done, or what is being done in each one of those lesson plans. And the lesson plans influence what is done in specific learning tasks and experiences that's at the lowest level and at the level of the student in this case. This curriculum flow talks about or discusses or shows that curriculum is what students should know and be able to do before they move on to the next lesson, before they move on to the next unit, before they move on to the next grade level, and so on. What students should know and be able to do defines what our curriculum is. It's important to note here that our national standards are not curriculum. They are guides or recommendations for what curriculum should be designed to accomplish. It's also important to note here that the substandards that are listed underneath main standards that we have are called elements. Sometimes they are numbered, particularly in the South Carolina standards. Underneath 6 main standards, we have substandards that are 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.3, 1.4, and so on. These grade level outcomes or performance indicators, I call them elements, are the things that teachers need to work with in assuring that they meet each standard for South Carolina. For us, we do worry about the state standards. That's what we need to link to our lesson objectives. It's part of accreditation because of SACS, which is the Southern Association for Southern Accreditation for Colleges and Schools. These grade level outcomes are plugged into the curriculum. These elements are plugged into the curriculum in the framework of your choice, and that identifies the units that you'll teach for the year. It's important to make sure that these elements show up or appear in at least one of your units as an objective for that unit. Unit objectives are usually very broad. Standards are even broader. In fact, standards are the broad guidelines that most of the country uses. Here's that word again called progression. Providing a sequence of learning in a variety of activities is what makes up our curriculum. We want to design progressions that build on previously learned skills and content. Therefore, in your annual curriculum, you might start with a simple netball game like pickleball, and then take that pickleball and move it more into tennis and or badminton after that. As stated before, you always want to link your curriculum and or your objectives to local, state, and national standards. And for us, that would be the South Carolina Physical Education Standards, which currently have 6 main standards. These standards for South Carolina, by the way, are posted in your Blackboard website. Some inappropriate curricular decisions are exposing students to limited kinds of activities, in other words, team sports only, which happens quite a lot on the high school level. Not allowing or encouraging adequate practice time, in other words, staying on a task or a learning task for a short period of time and expecting everyone to know exactly how to do that task and not become proficient at it. The same skills taught year after year to the same students. Gameplay without adequate skill development, which was mentioned back in Chapter 5. And of course, the worst curricular decision that we make is choosing activities and curriculum according to teacher preference. Although that's probably the worst curricular decision to make, it happens quite often in high schools and middle schools around the country. We do need to mention assessment here because assessment is part of the curriculum that you have in your schools. The two primary purposes of assessment in physical education ought to be to provide feedback to the students on their improvement and also provide feedback to the teachers to improve their instruction. Formative assessment is always very helpful to students to improve skill. Students should always be informed of results regularly throughout the unit as well as throughout the year. You should use a variety of assessment methods, something called triangulation, where you use not one type of method of assessment but 2 or 3, so that because one method of assessment might not give a teacher a very good picture of the performance of that student. Teachers should have clearly defined criteria for assessment, and they should be given to the students ahead of time or in advance so that the students are able to see what's going to be expected of them. Grading systems need to reflect the degree that the student learning has achieved the objectives of the course or the unit or the lesson. Some inappropriate assessment decisions are when teachers administer a test just one time at the end of a unit as a summative test and use that as a grade of performance, or not having no opportunity for using assessment to learn or to improve throughout the unit. Of course, a very bad type of assessment is assigning grades based on a single skill, fitness levels, or a written test at the end of the unit, as we said before. Another problem that's often happening in physical education that we need to get rid of is using arbitrary measures of effort and participation that are not quantifiable or objective or being able to observe those things, and they don't reflect the objectives of the lesson and or the unit. Students being uncertain about criteria is not good. They need to be aware of the criteria they are being assessed on, and course grades unfortunately sometimes reflect primarily dress and attendance, and that is not, again, it's not that it's not important, but it is something that should not be graded on for most of the grade for the course in physical education. The unit plan should have clearly stated goals or unit objectives that say what the student should know and be able to do at the end of a unit. It should identify the scope and sequence of the content or the developmental analysis. It should also contain a block plan or block time frame for a unit day by day, and it also should contain an evaluation plan or procedures for the entire unit. Those evaluation procedures should include ongoing formative assessment during the unit as well as a summative type of assessment at the end. Some considerations in planning the unit: you need to identify all elements that need to be included in the unit, the length of the unit, which depends on the school schedule. By the way, the school schedule is made up of 36 weeks out of the year, 180 days out of the year for traditional school schedules. Students should always have an orientation to a unit, a beginning motivational introduction to why a unit is justified in the school curriculum. Pre-testing or pre-assessment is always a good thing to do at the beginning of a unit to know the level of the students, and it's also good to be able to ability group students if it's necessary for certain types of instruction. That's the end of podcast 1 for chapter 10.